Welcome back to the Thinking Critical Comic Book Podcast. It's time for your comic book writing 101 lesson. It looks like we got one professor this week. We've got Mr. Mark Pellegrini in the house to talk about creating and developing supporting characters. This is very important stuff. And here with me to talk about this is Mr. Mark Pellegrini. We do expect Aaron possibly to show up later. What's going on?
I hope so, because we're talking supporting characters in this episode, and his comics, especially Darkwing Duck and The Muppet Show and stuff like that, they're known for having great supporting characters. So I hope Aaron can make it.
Absolutely. And welcome to everybody that's already with us. Should have a fun conversation. I guess we should get into it. Let's talk about the importance of supporting characters. Why you should be working with them. Here's the main crux of it, Mark. In my opinion, we'll see if you agree with me. Your antagonist or even your protagonist, they need friends, family, mentors, teachers, and rivals to grow the character, and you need them to grow your setting. That's the main importance of supporting characters.
Essentially, is that you need other characters besides your primary character for a lot of just logistical reasons. You know, Sherlock Holmes needs his Watson so that he can bounce his exposition off of somebody, or else we'll never know what's going on in Sherlock's head. And characters need a supporting cast to create dynamics so we can see different aspects of the character, like how they treat different people, how they react differently to different personalities. And that's the way we learn more about our main character. So to have a main character without a supporting cast would be really boring, and your character, as you said, would never grow.
So as a comic book writer, is this as fun or as exciting as creating your world or your main characters?
So I did a video on the Bunderdome about character dynamics, and I used Charlie Brown, so Snoopy Peanuts, as the gold standard of how to develop character dynamics and have a large cast of characters who all feel very diverse, and how they all behave differently and react differently to different characters. And so I always think of that in my head, is like, Charlie Brown's relationship with Lucy is very different from his relationship with Linus, which is different from his relationship with Sally, different from his relationship with Peppermint Patty, and so on. And we learn so much about Charlie Brown because of his different relationships. So I have a lot of fun with that, writing like Common America. It's an ensemble book, even though Carly's the main character, Common America. We have Misha, we have Vicky, we have Siggy, we have Kimiko, we have all these, and Sylvia, we have all these other characters, and their relationships with Carly are each different and unique. So the way she reacts and responds to them is different and unique, and that's fun to write. So I really do enjoy writing large cast of characters.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. You can do things with the supporting character you can't do with your main character. You can make a supporting character exceptionally unlikable, even if they're not a villain. You can do that. You can't really do that with your main character, like a protagonist.
I call that like the Mickey Mouse effect, and that's you have to be very careful with that, though. So Mickey Mouse back in the day, and the original black and white shorts that Walt Disney did, he's very fun because he can drink and smoke and flirt with girls and get into action and shoot guns and things. But once he became a corporate mascot, all that had to stop. So if you watch the color Mickey Mouse shorts, they're called Mickey Mouse shorts, but they will very quickly go away from what Mickey's doing and follow Donald or Goofy or Pluto, and Mickey's barely in his own cartoons because he's not allowed to do anything fun anymore. So that's always the setback that you have to be aware of, is that if you have too much fun with your supporting characters, that could dilute your main character and take the focus away from them. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, we've got Fizz Chozo says Jessica Jones was exceptionally unlikable. That is a weird trope amongst current comic book writers. I don't know if it's just comic books, but a lot of stuff on the indie scenes, you will find the protagonist is someone that you don't care if they die or not, because as soon as they're introduced, you don't like them. They have flaws, but the flaws are so enormous and so great, and they're just off-putting.
I think you can give your character flaws, but the important flaw to try to avoid giving your character is to give them an unlikable personality. Now, your character can have personality quirks, they can have unlikable aspects to them, but if their fundamental personality is detestable and obnoxious, then you've basically killed your own book. No one wants to read a book if the main primary character is just grating and gets on your nerves. And I see that with so many especially Marvel comics, like She-Hulk and Lady Thor and stuff like that. It's just like, I don't want to read about these characters. I don't like them. And that's when the supporting cast comes in, and they're suddenly more endurable than the main character. And like, I'd rather read a book about the sidekick than the main character right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's an indie book. I won't go into too much detail, but within the first issue, like his children walk in on him like cheating on their mother, and he's not exactly apologetic about it. Let's just put it that way. It's like, I don't care if he wins. I hope he doesn't. I just want the kids to be okay.
So there's a horror movie that I really like. It's an underrated Stephen King movie called The Night Flyer, and I got to look up the name of the main character, of the actor who played him, but he's the jerk from RoboCop and Twin Peaks, and let me look it up real quick. But he's very good at playing a jerk. That's Miguel Ferrer. There we go. And that's his niche, is that he plays just the most detestable assholes ever. And he's great as a supporting character in like Twin Peaks. He's a recurring character, and he shows up. And he actually was in a lot of episodes of the Twin Peaks revival series. And like RoboCop, he's the young go-getter who gets killed during his coke party. But he's really great as this jackass supporting character. The Night Flyer, though, is the only time I can think of where Miguel Ferrer played that character of his asshole character as the main character of the movie, and you hate his guts throughout the whole movie, and you're just supposed to absolutely despise this guy, and then he gets it at the end, and it feels so good. Now it is absolutely satisfying, and it's a credit to Miguel Ferrer as an actor that he played that part so well. But that's something that if you're going to have your main character be that way, they have to die at the end. There has to be that consequence. Yeah, they have to get their comeuppance at the end, and that works if you're doing something that's a bottle story, that has a beginning and an end. If you're planning on doing an ongoing, where your main character is going to be the main character possibly into eternity, that's not going to work. There has to be an end point where they get what they deserve.
Like Dark Bobcat here says, Jessica Jones is what people who spend all day on Twitter wish they could be sassing people, say whatever they want with no consequences. Got to be consequences. So let's get back into the supporting characters. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, Dark Bobcat. And let's get into just some of the roles. We'll get into the types after this. So some of the roles that your supporting character they can do, they can flesh out your main character. That is one of the best things that your supporting characters can do, is give insight and flesh out your main character. They can help advance plots. They can carry subplots. That your main character, he can't do everything. You can throw a subplot on a supporting character, have them go do a few things, come back, and then he can address it. They can create conflict. Absolutely wonderful for creating conflict, reveal information, and provide like a change of pace and levity depending on the tone of your book.
Yeah, and you don't have to dump all that onto one supporting character, just have like the one sidekick. I know we talked a while ago about, was it you or Aaron who didn't like the Bat family? They like Batman being the solo creature of the night, but Batman, he's always at least had Alfred. Batman at his most solitary still has Alfred, because Batman needs someone, anyone, and James Gordon. So he needs someone to bounce his thoughts off of. He needs someone to, put him in his place sometimes, which Alfred can do very well, because Alfred he has that line in Mask of the Phantasm where Batman's like, "You think you know everything about me, don't you?" And Alfred says like, "I diapered your bottom, sir. I very well ought to." He can always outwit Batman, at least in repartee, and that humanizes Batman, really well. But Batman without Alfred, Batman just by himself, no James Gordon, no Alfred, no Robin, no nobody, would be incredibly boring. And quite frankly, probably would be unlikable, because especially during like the Infinite Crisis era Batman, where he was a paranoid maniac and he was just a jerk to everybody, and he fired Robin, and he created what was that satellite, Brother Eye, to spy on all the other superheroes, and he had his superhero files, all their identities and contingency plans. Like, he was, even with his supporting cast, he was really unlikable. And when he basically fired everybody and went to being solo for a little while, you saw just how unlikable and Batman could be without that supporting cast to humanize him and to sometimes take him down a peg.
And provide some levity, because Batman can be ultra serious. He needs someone to throw a Batman joke off, or maybe even joke at his expense every once in a while.
Exactly. And that's why Batman, he needs a Robin. Now, you can argue that the Bat family doesn't need to be, like 10 people strong. It doesn't need to be so huge. But he at least needs to have Alfred, James Gordon, Robin, and Batgirl sometimes. Mm-hmm. But that's why. Also, though, you have to be careful about who your supporting character is. And if you want to have that dynamic with your main character, it could bring baggage if you don't plan it carefully, which is why I really don't like the Batman hooking up with Batgirl thing that Bruce Timm does in all of his comics and animated films, because it's Batman hooking up with his best friend's daughter, and that's just really weird and really awkward. And he doesn't tell his best friend about it because, we got to keep those identities secret. So it's like you're shacking up with his daughter and you're keeping it a secret from him. Batman, you're awful. It's one of those things like, Bruce Timm's really into this, but I'm not sure he thought the consequences of it through. So if you're going to do that with your supporting cast, you got to think about the consequences that'll happen.
Another thing that you could do with a good supporting character, let's say your main character needs some information. And someone's going to provide it. It's like, hey, you need to go talk to this guy. He knows where you need to go next. Well, he goes there, and to get the information, that person can send him on a little side mission or a little, a challenge. And there you go. You have one episode of a comic if you're doing them, episodic, like 24 pages at a time. And he goes off, has to go a side quest, maybe do something for that character, and goes and gets his good information. And it's not so repetitively boring and exposition heavy. Exactly.
And if you have a cast of supporting characters whose job it is to be your main character's pit crew, essentially, that can also keep your character from being overpowered or overly intellectual. So your character can have someone who's a friend who's a mechanic and can fix his car for him if your character has like a Batmobile or something. Or if your character is smart but maybe not tech savvy, they can have the computer friend, like I think it was in the recent, it's something that there's a problem with, like Spider-Man, like he's smart, but how many disciplines of the science is he really supposed to know? Is he supposed to be so tech savvy as well as science savvy? He's supposed to be a chemistry major. Why is he building computers as well? Maybe Spider-Man should have a buddy who's tech savvy. I think the live action movies actually gave him was it Ned Leeds, who's sort of his computer buddy, to try and take that edge off. Like Donatello in Ninja Turtles. Like, pick a science and stick with it, but half the time it's like he's the science guy. So he's building machines, he's building cars in the turtle vans for him. Coding, he's creating like antiviruses. Yeah, there's an episode of the 2012 cartoon where there's a villain called the Creep who can basically, if he touches a mutant, he reduces them into toxic sludge, and Raphael has literally been dissolved, and he's in a jar, and he's goo, and they're like, Donatello, can you cure him? Like, cure him? He's in a jar. And like Donatello's like, I think I can reverse the effect the Creep had on him. And so Donatello does a bunch of science crap, and he somehow turns Raphael back to normal when he's goo. It's ridiculous. But your character, the science isn't just a one-shot discipline. There's a ton of different majors and disciplines. If your character's really good at chemistry, they may not necessarily be really good at mechanics, at building cars.
It feels like it's they use Tony Stark for in the Marvel universe. He shows up and he gives you a new suit.
I mean, I can understand if you have like a Tony Stark or a Reed Richards. If Tony Stark in the MCU feels like he's what Reed Richards would be if Marvel had owned the rights to Reed Richards at the time. You can have your Reed Richards super genius who's good at everything, but Peter Parker shouldn't be the super genius that's good at everything. Donatello shouldn't be. Donatello does machines, not Peter Parker. Now, there's a way to read that, and the way I read that initially was a little wrong. But exactly. But a supporting cast can solve that problem for you. Your main character can have friends who can do other things that they can't. And that brings that supporting cast in the fold, keeps your supporting cast from being dead weight, and also keeps your main character from being overpowered. So that's very, very useful, and it should be exploited more often.
Absolutely. And, carrying subplots, creating conflict, those are all very important. Let's talk about some of the There's really three types of supporting characters that we'll talk about. And when we're talking about supporting characters right here, we're talking about people, other characters in the book. We'll talk about some other types of supporting characters here in a minute. But there's, generally speaking, three that I can think of. Your supporters, people that are supporting the hero. Your Lois Lane, your guy in the chair, your Oracle, maybe in a Batman book. Those are supporting characters that are backing up your main hero, your main protagonist along their journey, and maybe carrying some of those side subplots, going and fixing that car that you were talking about earlier. You've got antagonizers, and this does not have to be just villains. Obviously, villains would go into their henchmen would be in here, but you can also have a J. Jonah Jameson. Not exactly a villain, but he is certainly an antagonist to Spider-Man.
Or Flash Thompson, that kind of thing, yeah.
Yep. And then the last one comes in a lot of forms. You got your informers, people that are going in and giving your main characters information, putting them on the path to go to where the story makes sense. Commissioner Gordon makes sense as a character like this. Is a lot of times Batman's on the crime scene. Commissioner Gordon comes in, tells them what they know, and maybe a lead or two, and then Batman goes off and solves the crime with the information that Gordon gave him. So those are like the three types of supporting characters. Obviously, they come in so many different varieties. It's not even funny.
Yeah, and I mean, just sticking with Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, is I've talked about it in the past, but reading the Epic collections that start from the original Amazing #1 up through to now, how fully formed Spider-Man was, but how great his supporting cast is, just going right all the way back to the beginning. I mean, so we talk about supporters. He's got his emotional support in Aunt May, but he's also got Aunt May doesn't join him in his adventures, and he's got his problems because he doesn't want Aunt May to know that he's Spider-Man, and she doesn't like Spider-Man. But at least he's got his emotional support because he has his antagonizers. At school, he's got Liz Allen and Flash Thompson, who are always making fun of him all the time. And we see his inner monologue, how he reacts to it. Peter knows that he could knock Flash's lights out anytime he feels like it, but he doesn't, because one, Uncle Ben taught him better. Two, he knows that that could give him away as Spider-Man. People might catch on. So he has fun with Flash in other ways, where he kind of gets kind of sneaky with his revenge on Flash, more like pranks. But he takes the social criticism on the nose. He has J. Jonah Jameson, who's just always tearing him down. But he kind of, in a way, he almost deserves it, because he is pulling a fast one on J. Jonah Jameson by taking pictures of himself to sell to J. Jonah. So that creates that great dynamic. I mean, and he's also got like his love interest in Betty Brant, happens really early. So not everything's terrible for Peter all the time. And he has those characters that he can bounce information off of. Like a lot of the times, J. Jonah Jameson, because he works at a newspaper, will give, he'll also be the informant character. He'll give Peter a lead, a scoop that Peter can follow if he's trying to like catch Electro or Craven or somebody. So you have an antagonist character who's also an informative character, but also a supporting character because he gives Peter money so Peter can pay Aunt May's medical bills. So J. Jonah Jameson, he's got 3 J's in his name, and he pulls triple duty as all 3 of those kinds of characters.
And Osborn starts out as a supporting character. Is his best friend's dad. He's pretty supportive, but he flips the switch. He ends up being an antagonist because it turns out he's the bad guy.
Which is, one of those great, maybe it's a trope to have the supporting character be revealed to like, it was me all along. I was the evil mastermind. It happens. You can pull it off and really well. If that supporting character who just seems like they're a buddy turns out to be much more than that, they would turn out to be a main villain or somebody else.
Yeah, you can create secrets with him. Why does he know so much? I know what he does for a living. It doesn't make sense that he would even know that. And then you can create some intrigue. And then when you finally get that rigged reveal, and it's like a punch to the gut, not only of the character, but to yourself or to the reader.
And that can be a very useful trick with supporting characters. So supporting characters by their nature, you're not following them. You're following the main character. So if a supporting character isn't there all the time, they could even be absent for an issue. You don't think about it because you're not following them. So that gives you as the writer an opportunity to explore like, well, what was that supporting character doing when he wasn't in that issue? Maybe he was in that issue. Maybe he was the villain. Maybe he was off doing something else, having his own machinations going on, working his own thing behind the scenes. And you have that free space to do that because the audience isn't following the supporting cast member, and you can exploit that for future narrative opportunities.
Also, informers, it doesn't just have to be verbal. It doesn't have to be, Commissioner Gordon telling Batman something. It can be Batman questioning somebody.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to talk about it, but they remember something, and it gives you a key piece of information.
Yeah, I mean, Batman's supposed to be a detective, right?
Yeah. Or, they say something to Batman. He knows they're lying, and now he has information. So you can do it a lot of different ways, and you could make it more show than tell a lot of times.
Now, an important thing to watch out for, an obstacle that you don't want to trip over, is you don't want the reader to know more than the main character, because then it's boring. So if you have your supporting character, if they're giving information, if they're doing it in a way where they give the information to the reader, but not to the main character, and the main character has to play catch up, that can be boring. Now, there's ways to do that where it works. Alfred Hitchcock had his famous bomb under the table seminar, his lecture, but his thesis is that it's okay if the audience has information that the reader doesn't, if it builds tension. If the audience knows that there's a bomb under the table that two characters are sitting at, but the characters don't know it's there, that creates tension for the reader, because you're screaming at the screen, there's a bomb under the table, and they don't know it, and then it explodes and everybody dies. But if it's something like solving a mystery, and you as the reader know who did it, but the main character, if it's Batman or whoever, doesn't, and they're trying to play catch up, that's boring. Because now all of a sudden you're smarter than Batman. You know the answer that he doesn't, and that removes the tension from the book. So if you have an informant character and they're delivering important exposition or important information, do it in a way in which they deliver it to the reader and the main character at the same time. Because if the main character's playing catch up, that's boring.
So can you have too many informants? Can you have too many supporters? Can you have too many antagonists? Do you need to keep them varied?
Yeah, you can have supporting cast bloat. We talked about the Bat family, how it just got too big, and not every member of the Batman family serves a unique function. All the Robins are alive now at the same time. They all have their different Robin identities. They can be Red Hood, or they can be Red Robin, or they can be Nightwing. And now all of a sudden there's just a whole bunch of these kids around, and Damian as well. And what necessarily do they do for Batman in a way that that complements his character, or are they just dead weight at this point? Stephanie Brown, she was Robin at one point, then she was Batgirl at one point. I guess if she still exists, because she's spoiler now, she's back to being spoiler. But does she really do anything that complements Batman as a character, that improves his dynamic, that does something that Huntress couldn't do or Batgirl couldn't do? I mean,
Orphan.
Does she really serve a purpose? No, she's just kind of there as a hanger-on, and that's supporting cast bloat, where there's just too many characters and they don't all complement the main character and serve a function, and that's when you need to trim them down. So yeah, it is possible to have too many.
All right, so let's move on. There are more types of supporting characters, especially in comics, than just your the supporting cast. Your settings and even equipment can be supporting characters in comics, and a lot of times in movies. Comics are a visual medium. And we think of Gotham, that sets a tone for the Batman series. Gotham itself is an obstacle for Batman, and it's a challenge to him as the hero. It's also something that the antagonists can use to their advantage. You can also use designs to give your settings and equipment personality. Think about the Millennium Falcon. That's one of the most beloved characters ever in Star Wars.
Think of your setting as a playground or a play set, and then you're going to have a lot of fun with it. I know Aaron said he was excited to talk about this last week, but he's not here right now, so I'm going to steal his thunder. Gotham as a character is just the greatest supporting character, because it is a city that could not exist in the real world. It exists only in this fantastical world of comics or cartoons or movies. And it's so special and unique, and that's what makes it great, is that it has this, true to its name, Gothic styling to it. If you think like Gotham, you think of Tim Burton era Gotham, from the first two Batman movies, where it's just dark. It's full of cathedrals and weird giant statues. It's just dark and oppressive and ominous. It's who is the city planner? Count Dracula. Who would make a city like this? But then, we have a merging of different Gothams from different eras, because sometimes an artist will draw Gotham in the Tim Burton style, but sometimes they'll give it that sleek Art Deco style from the Bruce Timm cartoon, the animated series, which does have that a little bit of the Tim Burton style, but it's also very unique in its own. It's very 1930s New York City kind of, but done, cranked up to an 11. So even New York City and at its most Art Deco didn't look like, Bruce Timm's Gotham did. Or it can be that weird campy 1960s Gotham where there's just giant props everywhere. Like, you go to the warehouse district, and on top of the roofs of all the buildings is a giant typewriter, because that's the typewriter factory. Or there's a giant billboard with a huge carrot on it, because that's the canned vegetables factory. And it's great because you can have all those Gothams at once. You can have your Tim Burton district. You can have your Bruce Timm district. You can have your Adam West district. And there's a reason for all of those to exist as they are. I think it was Arkham Asylum, not the Grant Morrison one, but the miniseries that was done in like the 2000s, Arkham Asylum Living Hell, where they explained why those giant props exist in Gotham. The explanation is part of its backstory. Part of the city's backstory was that there was a time, a long time ago, when when billboards were a form of advertising, before commercials. So everybody put giant props on top of their buildings to draw attention to their business. And then there was this weird war between businesses of who could have the biggest prop on their building. And that's really interesting. It's a crazy concept, but it's worked into the backstory of Gotham as a city, as a place, as a character. It gives it
personality.
Yeah, it gives it personality. It gives a reason for why these things exist. And of course, now they're all dilapidated, and it feeds into that Tim Burton era where Gotham is this living hellhole where it's decrepit and it's dying and it's scary. It works so well, and Batman can go to any one of those places. And then there's Arkham Asylum, which is straight out of an H.P. Lovecraft story. It's even named after Arkham from H.P. Lovecraft, and it's this terrible nightmare castle full of crazy people and monsters. And you can have all of that in one city, Gotham, and it's the ultimate playground for storytelling.
Yeah, it's got its own personality. It's another antagonist that is there to challenge Batman, and I love it. So get on to some of the like a supporting character, as thinking of the Millennium Falcon. It's got its own personality. It's got its own quirks. That a lot of times the maintenance hasn't been upkeep. So if it's time to hit hyperspace or whatever, it might not work. You got to have someone talk to the Falcon.
Exactly. So sometimes it's the fastest ship in the galaxy, and sometimes it just doesn't work. And I think that's great about the Millennium Falcon Han talks a big game about it in the first movie, and in the second movie, the Millennium Falcon spends the whole film just not operating. And it's one of the biggest obstacles. The reason they can't go to light speed and get away from Boba Fett and Darth Vader is that the light speed is not working. So they have to limp their way to Cloud City, which helps expand the amount of time in which the story takes place, because you have to have enough time for Luke to go through his training with Yoda. But while Luke's training with Yoda, what's Han and Leia and Chewie doing? How are they spending that lengthy amount of time? Could be months. Well, the Millennium Falcon's not working, so they're having to play this really, really tense game of hide and seek with the Empire and with Boba Fett, just trying to get to a civilization where they can enact repairs on the Millennium Falcon, which turns out to be Cloud City. And of course, they don't make it there, before the Empire, and that ends up being a great twist in the movie. But that's all because the damn Millennium Falcon just won't cooperate, and so the ship creates its own personality. And heck, it has an onboard computer, and I think even C-3PO says when he's talking, he said he can talk to the Millennium Falcon. We can't hear what it's saying, but he's like, your onboard computer has the most peculiar dialect, So we know that the Millennium Falcon almost is a person in its own way, which can be very fun.
Yeah, and you can think of other things in comics, like the Batmobile kind of is its own character. Obviously, it's evolved like other characters throughout the years. So it's one of those things. You can't just think about your setting. You got to give it some personality. Give some life to it. Give some quirks that make it stand out. Make it an obstacle or something to help out your protagonist, in and of itself. And you got to use it that way. Like you said, you got to think about it as like a place set.
Yeah, props can. So we have people who. My mom had a car that she named Lucille. She named her car something. And so when I think about that car, I don't think about the car my mom had when I was a kid. I think of Lucille. Like in my head, that car is always going to have a name. And you can name props and give them their own personality, even if they're inanimate objects. I mean, and that can be something that becomes very the audience will become fixated and attached to those props. I mean, Goemon from Lupin III has a sword called Zantetsuken, and you don't want him to ever have another sword. You want him to have that very special, unique sword that's a fit for Goemon. And swords are often like that. King Arthur has Excalibur. You don't want King Arthur to have another sword. His sword's Excalibur. You give him a different sword, that's wrong. Lion-O has the Eye of Thundera. He has the Sword of Omens. And the Sword of Omens has its own sort of intelligence because it can tell Lion-O when it's going to work and when it's not. Lion-O can't go and stab another Thundercat. The sword will break itself if he tries to stab Tigra. And the villains use that against Lion-O in several episodes where he accidentally is tricked into trying to stab Panthro, and the sword just breaks. The sword's like, nope, not happening, and it'll break on him. So you can impart personality onto inanimate objects that
like Mjolnir in Thor.
Oh yeah, Mjolnir and stuff. Yeah, and the audience will be as attached as the character as you are to those objects, and they won't want
somebody wield Mjolnir that shouldn't be. They'll be like, that would never happen.
Not going to work.
That hammer would never allow that to happen.
Like, would you want Han Solo to be flying any ship other than the Millennium Falcon? That would be wrong. I mean, I think it's in One Piece. They have their ship, and I'm not a big enough One Piece fan to really talk with authority, but I know that they changed ships, pirate ships, at one point in the story, and that was a huge storyline. One of the characters, Usopp, does not want to change ships because they're so attached to that one ship, but it's literally falling apart. And so they have to start this new era in their journey with a new ship. And it's a really big deal because the readers, the characters, the writer are all attached to this object. It's basically a character at that point, and discarding it means letting it die. And that's sad.
And Darth Bobcat mentions, in my novels, a character named a rifle Lucille. Funny coincidence, also defines a character as somebody who's a bit quirky. Plus, you can give that rifle personality. Maybe it fires a bit to the left. Maybe it's the most true rifle in the world, going downwind. You can do things like that to where he's got maybe a special ability when he's got that rifle for your character.
Right. So, and it's funny because a lot of people want to name, it's common, it goes back to Excalibur and Mjolnir. That's your character will have a weapon that they'll give a name to, but you don't have to give it an edgy try-hard name. You don't have to call it the Atom Smasher or the Foe Hammer like in Lord of the Rings. You can call Stormbreaker. You can have them call their gun Lucille, and that'll tell you a lot about that character. That character is not edgy and try-hard. That he names his weapon something super cool and crazy. Maybe he's just, like you said, quirky and fun. Will name his rifle Lucille.
Yep. And so someone mentioned robots in Star Wars. Obviously, that's a big part of the characterization within there. I don't like robots that don't have personality. They're just props. It's like having a blaster, I guess. It's got one function. But I do love robots with personality. R2D2, C3PO. Maybe my favorite robot is actually from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh yeah, what's his name? The pessimistic one.
The super depressed robot. I love it.
Like, we're all gonna die. Okay. He's like Eeyore. Was he voiced by Alan Rickman in the movie? Yeah, and he was great. I mean, the movie itself was okay, but he was the best part of that movie. Like, he just had all the best lines and all the best timing.
So maybe Lando having a relationship with his robot would have been more palatable if the robot was cool or interesting.
Right. Well, so think of. I don't like robots that talk like robots either. Like, I am a robot, give me input data. Like, write your robots like Bender from Futurama, or just any given transformer. Just write them as a person that just happens to be a robot.
Star Wars, the one that came out that was about them getting the planes to the Death Star.
Oh, Rogue One, yeah.
K2SO.
Everyone loved that character. He's the only character anybody remembers from that damn movie.
He's the only one that had a personality in the movie.
Right? Everybody else in that movie is so forgettable. Yeah, he's great. And they can steal the show that way. And he's a supporting character. He's not the main character. But who is the main character? I can't even remember her name. Was it Jin Urso or something? Like,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's her name. But yeah, she was so boring that she basically played second fiddle to her own supporting cast, who were all more interesting than she was. She had the Mickey Mouse effect, where she was so boring that all the other ancillary characters stole her thunder.
Yeah, she's supposed to be like this rogue character that's an outlaw, and you don't ever see her do anything bad.
And that can be the problem, is that if you try to make your character too cool, too aloof and distant and mysterious, that you end up giving them nothing to work with. And so the audience will go in search of another character to interest them, and they'll latch onto a supporting character instead of your main character.
The Forrest Whitaker character was gonzo. That thing was so nuts. It's a good thing it was only in there for like 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think he was one of those characters that had a much bigger role, but then when they re-edited that movie from like the time they showed the trailer to the time it hit the theaters, it was a completely different film.
Yeah. So your supporting characters don't just have to be people. Your settings, your equipment, robots and things. You got to give them personality, make them unique, and people will grow an attachment to them. So let's talk about developing these supporting characters. This is going to be very important. I imagine this is why a lot of people are here now that we've kind of laid the groundwork for this. These are some of the ways that I say that you can develop supporting characters. First up, create a character Bible with like their history, personality traits, physical description, skills, and training. Maybe not all of that makes it into your comic book or your novel, whatever it is that you're writing, but you have a frame of reference to all the things that the character should be able to do, have skills and things that they shouldn't be able to do, and things that should emotionally affect them because there's a character history, maybe how they lost their parents, things like that. They should have independent goals of the main character. When you think of Alfred, he's a supporting character to Batman, but his goals are completely different than Batman's. He wants Batman to live. They should
never feel like an accessory to the main character. They should be supporting to the main character, but they should not be a hanger-on who just exists to dote over the main character, because then they don't feel like your supporting character won't feel like a character. They'll just feel like a prop.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, we'll see this in a lot of Bendis books, where there's no personality to any of the characters. They all sound the same. So they have to have unique personalities, speech patterns. You think about Splinter. Who in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles talks like that character?
No one.
Obviously, he's a mentor, but he's got his own unique dialect, and he's got his own unique personality.
Splinter is great as a supporting character. So one of the things you can do, and we can go back to like Watson, like Watson exists for Sherlock Holmes to bounce exposition off of. But Watson can do so much more than that. Watson's a doctor.
You can also challenge him on stuff he's smarter than, like you were about to say.
Yeah, so he's a doctor. So Sherlock Holmes can misdiagnose someone, and then Watson can educate him. It's like, no, that's not what that is. This is the medical condition this person has. Or if Sherlock Holmes gets shot, Watson can remove the bullet, or somebody else gets injured. Watson is the one who can bandage them and fix them up. Watson's also ex-military, so he can do a lot of physical things that Sherlock Holmes can't. He can fight better than Sherlock Holmes. So he exists as his own independent person, even though his purpose in the story is to basically just be someone to throw exposition off of. Splinter also is as great as a character because he's there to dispense wisdom to the Turtles. And that can, in a way, make the character too intelligent. But he's also an old man. He's not necessarily feeble.
He's like a paragon. Really well.
Yeah, but his job is to sit in the sewers, in a lotus position and meditate. And the Turtles go to him when they need advice, when they need help. But he can act as an antagonist because he's also their father. So if they want to sneak out to the surface, they've got to sneak past Splinter, and that's a challenge in and of itself. So in a way, I always like the idea that Splinter knows when the Turtles are sneaking out, and he deliberately doesn't make it easy on them as part of their training. If they can slip past him, then Splinter, in his way as a father and as a sensei, says, okay, they earned the right to go to the surface tonight and do whatever they want to do, but they got to get past me first. And that's part of their training. And that's a really interesting aspect. It's a nice balance of sensei and father. And that's why Splinter doesn't feel like an accessory to the Turtles. He feels like a fully fleshed out character who's there to support them.
In many ways, kind of above them. If there were 4 Splinters, the world would be safer rather than the 4 Turtles. But there's not enough. Right?
Yep.
And then also the strengths and weaknesses of your supporting characters should enhance and challenge your main character. Think of Foggy Nelson. He's there to support Matt Murdock, but he's also there to call him on his BS. Like, why are you doing this with Elektra again? Every time you guys do this, it turns out bad for you. She screws you over, and then you end up committing a crime. Stop doing this, and he gets to, point things out. That I really love Foggy Nelson as a supporting character.
So that's the other thing to avoid is that I think we talked about it when we talked about humor when we had that video a few weeks ago. But always avoid having the dead weight comic relief character. Now, if your main character is a grouchy spoil sport, it doesn't make jokes, you can have your comedic supporting character, your comedy relief character, but they have to be able to do something else. They have to be like Sokka from Avatar: The Last Airbender, I think is one of the best examples of the comedy relief character who isn't a dead weight character. Sokka in Avatar in a way, he's the leader of the group because he's the most strategically minded of the team. He's the one who lays out their plans. When they need to know where to go and what to do, they ask Sokka. In a way, he's the most intelligent of all of them, but he's also the comedy relief character who gets all the best lines and does the goofiest stuff and has his own shtick. But he's not obnoxious and worthless. So you have to be very careful if you're going to have a comedy relief character to make sure that they can do something else that contributes to the dynamic of the story. Otherwise, no one's going to think they're funny. They're going to think they're annoying.
We'll talk about American Pie. I imagine you've seen that movie.
So long ago, I don't really remember it.
Do you remember Stifler? He's hilarious.
Oh yeah, he's funny in small doses in the first movie because I've seen like the first three, and by the third movie, isn't he like the main character now?
He's one of the main cast, and you can't stand him. He's too much.
Yeah.
But as a supporting character with maybe 4 or 5 scenes where he's a bit of a dumbass, but he gives a place for the characters to have a big party, and someone for them to kind of make fun of and what they don't want to be when they lose their virginity or whatever. Great character. As a member of the main cast, awful.
Exactly. So that's the other thing is don't be afraid to use your supporting characters in small doses as needed, because you might end up with the Stifler effect where it's too much of a good thing and everybody hates it now.
Melissa McCarthy in, Bridesmaids. Hilarious. Once she becomes the main character or main focus of a story and she's like the main character, it's too much. It's off-putting.
Too much Melissa McCarthy. That's a bad
Absolutely.
That's the worst.
We got Darth Bobcat. Since Sparrow isn't here, Launchpad is great too. What do you think about Launchpad?
I like Launchpad. Yeah, I can't fill Aaron's shoes when it comes to talking Darkwing Duck and DuckTales. I don't want to overstep my bounds on that. But yeah, Launchpad is great because I remember him so well from DuckTales. But when I go back and I rewatch DuckTales, I'm surprised that he's not in a lot of episodes. And the episodes he is in, he's always kind of slightly removed from the cast. He's there to get them from point A to point B in his plane and do it in a hilarious fashion. But once they get there, he's usually, set aside. Sometimes he'll join them on the adventure, the treasure hunt or whatever they're doing. But if they don't need him to go with them on the adventure, then the writers don't send him off on the adventure. He's just there to get them from A to B. He serves that function really well, and he's hilarious. Too much Launchpad, though, can be a bad thing.
Absolutely, you don't want the supporting comedy character to end up taking over because you
water down what makes them special if you have them all the time. It's almost like eating something. It's like you really like chocolate donuts, but do you want to have chocolate donuts with every meal?
I like onions on my cheeseburger.
Yeah, but you don't want
throw a couple extra slices on there and see how much I like onions.
Yeah, right. I've had that problem where I like onions on a turkey sandwich, but if you cut the slice too thick, then that's all you taste. You don't taste the turkey or anything else.
It overpowers all the good stuff that you actually came to the party for. It needs to enhance the flavor of what you're doing in your party. Absolutely. Did we cover all the stuff on that one? I think we did. I mean, all right, what's your favorite supporting character in TMNT besides Splinter? Let's hear this.
Ooh, so my favorite supporting character in Ninja Turtles is Casey Jones, and he's one of those characters who he's at times he feels less like a supporting character and more like a main ensemble character.
He's like a fifth turtle because he's also can handle himself.
Exactly, but when the plot doesn't need him to be there, he's not there, and then he never overtakes the Ninja Turtles as the main character. But so Mirage Casey is a very complicated character. He's very interesting. If you only know Casey from the cartoons, you're missing out on a really, really interesting and dynamic character, because Casey falls hard in the Mirage series. He starts out as the cool badass who hangs out with Raph and gets into street fights with him and everything. And they go and after they beat up a whole bunch of purple dragons or foot ninja, they go and they pound some brewskis and get drunk. And he's this really like almost vacuously cool character. But they start picking away at him as volume 1 goes on, and you find out that he goes and he pounds beer all the time because he's an alcoholic, and he actually has a bad case of alcoholism. He gets into fights all the time, but he gets his ass kicked, and he comes back, bloody and bruised and missing teeth. And gradually, April, who's initially infatuated with him because he's this cool bad boy, starts to sort of, when they have to go to Northampton and live together because they've been exiled, she kind of sees the other side of the coin, that he's a guy who drinks too much and fights too much and is kind of a loser. And at one point, he accidentally kills a gangster, a gang member, like a thug, during one of the fights with the turtles, and he gets in serious trouble for that. And the turtles have to cover for him, and he starts to feel like dead weight, like he's bringing them all down. And so Casey leaves, and he basically goes on a trip during the City at War arc, where he is taken to his lowest point. He even gets his car stolen from him, and he meets a girl who's pregnant, and he decides instead he's going to take care of her. He marries her. It's not even his kid. This is Shadow Jones, who she's pregnant with. And she dies giving birth, and he has to raise that kid all by himself. And he finds something really that's much more important, and he grows as a character, and he develops, and he's someone so completely different by the end of that arc than who he started as. And he's such a complicated character. It's great, but you don't see any of that in the cartoons and the movies. As much as I like him in the movies, it's only in the Mirage comics that he's that developed as a supporting character. He has his own life outside of what he does with the Ninja Turtles. I had another example of a supporting character, but I think Casey Jones pretty much covers it.
My bad. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, the one I was going to say was, because I'm reading it right now, so it's the freshest in my mind, is Flash Thompson. And Flash Thompson is such a great example of a character who starts out as being just utterly unlikable, because he's the bully. He's the bully who picks on Peter Parker.
You know, it's weird if you read those first early issues, Peter's kind of the bully too.
Peter gains confidence, which is interesting, because when Flash is picking on him in the early issues, and he's Peter has his glasses. There's a point where Peter loses his glasses. I think it's in issues 7 or 8, because Flash knocks them off of him and they break. And Flash is actually about to apologize, and then Peter lights into Flash, and then Flash goes back into bully mode. Peter actually he cuts Flash off when Flash is actually trying to be a good person for a second. So that's on Peter. But we start seeing Flash develop later as a character, and Liz as well, because Liz joins in with Flash to pick on Peter. But then Aunt May gets really sick for the first time in the book and goes to the hospital. And Liz and Flash show up at the hospital to talk to Peter, to try and cheer him up. And, Liz is like, we heard about Aunt May, and so we had to come. And Peter's like, Flash, you came? And Flash is like, doing that thing. He's like, yeah, well, only because Liz made me. But we start to see that Flash might actually be a human being underneath the bully exterior. And I've read the old Spider-Man before. I'm rereading it now, but Flash has this really interesting character arc where he outgrows being a bully. And then when Peter goes to college and Flash goes to college too, they become like best friends. And they form like this clique with Harry Osborn. But
until
Flash grows
goes to war. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he goes to war. And that's one of those things I hate writers nowadays, modern Spider-Man writers, who forget that Flash grew as a character and stopped being a bully. And if they write Flash as a bully now, they've completely misinterpreted the character.
No,
and they don't understand him. Yeah, he went to war. I think there was an arc, it might have been J. Michael Straczynski, where Flash got in a car accident that the Green Goblin orchestrated and got brain damage and reverted back to being a bully. And that's terrible. Get rid of that. Stop that shit. You're dialing your character's growth back by doing that. Flash isn't the person he used to be. He's a great person now. He started out as a bully, as a bad guy, as an antagonist, but he grew and changed over decades and became a good guy. Don't dial that back just to make him a bully again. And you can tell a lot of the times the writers they have their own issues that they never worked through with bullies that picked on them in high school. So they want the bully character to get his comeuppance.
I can't
the Flash
forgive him.
isn't that person anymore. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's another great example of a supporting character who grew and changed and developed over time.
So let's talk. This will be our last topic. Then we're going to start taking viewer questions. So if you have questions about supporting characters or anything about writing, Mark and I will take that here in a couple of seconds. But this is
I just saw in the chat. I'm sorry to cut you off. But just another great example: Bulk and Skull from Power Rangers. I won't go into their life story, but Bulk and Skull are actually the main characters of Power Rangers for the first 7 seasons, and they're great. So okay, sorry.
So let's get into utilizing supporting characters. We've gone over a lot of this already just in the conversation, but you can progress the main story a lot using your supporting characters. You can reveal information about your main character or the setting that they're in or the history of the setting that they're in. And you can do it a lot of times without telling. You can have them remembering maybe something that happened to their parents, or maybe they can remember something that happened to the main character that he doesn't want to talk about. Like, there's something that's affecting him, and then 2 people can talk, and then you can get that information finally. You can provide a dissenting point of view or challenge, show key events or ideas without narrative, and flesh out the world.
Right. I mean, so we can have Tim Drake, talking to Alfred. And it's like, I don't get it, Alfred. Like, I've trained and trained and trained. Why won't Bruce let me become Robin? And then Alfred can say, well, there's the Robin before you. And then he can tell him about Jason Todd's tragic death, and that's news to Tim, and that's reminding, the readers about a storyline that maybe they missed because, there's so many years of continuity. But it's 2 characters talking about the main character, providing information to the reader that, and not necessarily having to provide it to the main character. And I know that I talked about providing information to the reader and the main character, try to do it simultaneously. But in this case, it's just backstory, and it's not necessarily the main character already knows that stuff. Batman already knows Jason Todd's dead, but the reader's finding out. Mm-hmm. And so that is a really useful tool to have.
Absolutely. So you gotta utilize your supporting characters. They have to move the story forward. Otherwise, you just have people sitting around eating dinner, talking, and you don't want that. So they need to be in action as well. And a lot of times, like you mentioned, they need to go off and do something on their own and solve something, or maybe come back and be like, "Hey, I tried to do this, but there's a guy over there that needs to be handling before we can get that done." And really move things forward.
Right. So, your supporting cast, like in Common America, we have, the main character, Carly, Common America. And then we have the common core, who's, Misha, Common Comet, and Kimiko, Common Ramen, and Sylvia, who's Common Victory. But we also have these characters who aren't part of that group. We have Siggy, who's the potential love interest for Carly. And we have Vicky, who's her best friend from when they were kids. And other characters like Sylvia was originally a supporting character. Now she's Common Victory. She kind of moved up. And then we have our antagonist characters who are our villains in their own way, like Lansky, who exist just to antagonize the cast. But they aren't like the main villains like Vermilion Masquerade is, the superpowered villains. But they also provide narrative substance. So for the first saga of Common America, we always open with a flashback that shows Carly's dynamic with these characters, be they supporting cast or antagonist characters. So we learn a lot about Carly's backstory, her as a person, but we also simultaneously learn about these supporting characters. And so they feel fleshed out as much as Carly is because they were there with her in those flashbacks and in those backstory elements. So you can use that to grow your characters simultaneously, and your supporting cast can feel as developed and as interesting as your main character if they're a part of that main character's world and that main character's backstory.
Absolutely. So I don't know. Are we done talking about supporting characters? You want to answer a few questions here, Mark?
Yeah, let's do a Q&A.
Let's do some Q&A. We've got a Warwick Zhao. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Who was the worst supporting character in the Bat family with the least character traits?
I can tell you the ones that I personally don't like very much, and it isn't so much that they don't have character traits, it's just that I don't like their character traits. I have never liked Huntress. I have never enjoyed her as a character. She exists as a way to be a hero who antagonizes Batman because she's the she's the crime fighter in Gotham who won't play by Batman's rules and won't be part of his family, except half the time she is playing by his rules, and half the time she is in the Batcave and working with them and part of the group. But no, she's not. She's also the edgy rebel who isn't part of all that, and will tell Batman to his face that she's not going to do things the way he wants to do things. And it's so inconsistent with her. And her characterization is honestly just so abrasive and unpleasant, where she's just always like fighting back against Batman. And most of the time Batman's right. And so she's just getting in the way. Like, I really don't like Baroness. Huntress. I like the Baroness from G.I. Joe.
What is awesome. It, G.I. Joe?
Yeah, no, Baroness and G.I. Joe is great. Huntress and Batman's terrible. I can't stand her.
So we've got ICT Vinny. Writers nowadays, do they even have to know character history in order to write a book? What's your impression of that?
Well, if it's someone writing like for the main two, like Marvel and DC, then I don't expect the writer to have read all like 60 years of Spider-Man comics, but they should at least have the ability to go and look up their Wikipedia entry. And just get the gist of the character. If you're going to write, X-Men, I understand you can't read, 60 years of X-Men comics, but just if you're going to put the Blob in your issue, just go to his Wikipedia article and see like what the Blob's deal was. Where was he the last time anybody saw him? I would say that's an editor's job, is to help the writer get up to speed on a character, but we all know Marvel and DC editors don't really have a job. I don't know what they do. It's certainly not keeping track of continuity. So yeah, if you're going to write Flash Thompson, make sure that he's not the character you think he is from the last time you read a comic with Flash Thompson in it, because that could have been 20 years ago, and a lot can happen to a character in 20 years. So just make sure to get up to speed. A lot of writers don't seem to do that anymore.
I agree. We've got Neostar Productions. Remember when superheroes were fairly self-sufficient? They didn't need a whole ensemble to solve a single problem. A lot of the main characters, like Superman, couldn't solve anything without Lois or Supergirl there for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that a bloated cast of supporting characters is just going to be a byproduct of a main character existing for half a century. They're going to amass well-wishers and hangers-on. And I do like those characters, but again, you can have Superman have his whole super family of all these characters. They just don't all have to exist at the same time or be part of the story at the same time. You can have Jimmy come in and assist Superman with a story, and then he can just F off and not be in a Superman comic for 6 months or 7 months. It's okay for a supporting character to serve a purpose, but if you don't need them, then you don't have to use them. The entire Bat family does not need to be in the Batcave all at once with Batman. I don't even think there's enough room in the Batcave for how many Bat family members he has.
Well, Superman should never need assistance when it comes to like strength.
No, not when it's strength, and that's why
that is his power.
Yeah, Silver Age Superman comics. The reason they're so fun and weird is that most of the time Superman can't solve the conflict with his strength. He has to outwit the problem. And that's why Superman comics from the Silver Age are so much fun. They're very different from Superman comics now, where most of the time he just needs to get into a fight scene. But that's Superman, and he gets help. Lois will help him, and like she had her own comic, Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. Jimmy had his own comic, Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, where they had their own stories and they had their own merits as characters. Half the time, though, Superman doesn't always need their help.
So we've got Janko M. I heard once that if you create different supplemental supporting characters, you can think of them coming from different franchises. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure I quite understand. I think of them as coming from different franchises. So, like, if you're creating your cast of characters in your indie comic, do you mean like you're drawing archetypes from different franchises? Like, I'm going to create a character who's like a Robin, or I'm going to create a character who's like
somebody from the Star Wars universe shouldn't show up in Gotham.
Oh, okay. Is that what that means? Yeah.
That's the way I've kind of taken it. Like that seems a little bit off. I mean, but you can certainly design a character after Han Solo.
Yeah, I mean, all characters now, everything under the sun has been seen before. So I mean, even Han Solo is the rogue archetype. The rogue with the heart of gold. That you find out later on that he's not such a bad guy. Yeah, he shoots Greedo at the start of the movie, but he comes back and saves Luke at the end of the movie. So you
he's
find
Logan,
out
but a supporting character.
Right, so you can have those kinds of characters. I mean, Batman himself was a knockoff of the Shadow, and so not even the characters we think of as being original aren't necessarily original. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to take inspiration of characters from other franchises. Just make sure that they fit with what you're writing and what your setting is. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
L. Kimlo C. Any tips on introducing new villains in the story effectively, especially villain teams?
Well, you have to make sure that we had that chat about villains, didn't we? Like a few weeks ago. So I don't want to repeat too much of that. Definitely go and watch that video. Aaron has some great insights on villains, and I talk about them too. That was a really fun video that we did. But I think that you can have different flavors of villains. That's
you can come in with a bang. There can be the slow burn reveal that somebody was the villain all along, or you can have the villain that's been in the shadows and it finally emerges after maybe he's broke your character down.
Yeah, there's no one single best way to introduce a villain. You can just don't do the one way all the time, or it'll get boring. And you can have villains that have different power levels. You can have your dark side villain, but you can also have your toy man and your prankster. They all serve different purposes, and they keep it interesting. They keep it fresh.
All right, Darth Bobcat. Why can Batman support a sidekick, but others like Spider-Man can't? What would a proper Peter Parker sidekick look like?
Peter Parker should never have a sidekick, and the fact that there's a spider family pisses me off because it completely misses the point of who Peter is. And Tim and I go off on this all the time. Tim hates Into the Spider-Verse and the whole concept of the Spider-Verse, because what made Peter special, what made Spider-Man special when he was created, was that he was a teenager who wasn't a sidekick. He was a teenager who was the primary hero. And that was unusual in the 60s, because if you were a teenager, you were a sidekick, you were a Robin.
You're the point of view character for the reader.
Yeah. And so you weren't supposed to be the main character. You weren't supposed to be the hero. But Peter Parker threw all that out the window. He was a teenager with teenager problems going it alone. And that was the point of contention for a lot of his stories. Most of Peter's problems in his stories don't even come from the villains. It comes from him having to juggle a teenager's life with being a hero and having no support. And at least on the hero's level, he has his support characters like Aunt May and Liz and Flash as a person, as a secret identity. But as a hero, he's alone, and that creates so much tension in his stories. Spider-Man shouldn't have a sidekick. He can have friends. He can have amazing friends, like Iceman and Firestar, and he's friends with Human Torch, who comes and helps him out. But I don't think Spider-Man should ever be part of a team. As much as I enjoyed the Amazing Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends as a kid, I always thought it was weird that Spider-Man was part of a team. I didn't like it when he was on the Avengers, when the Avengers was, like Wolverine and Hulk and Spider-Man. I didn't like that era very much. I think Spider-Man works when he's just going it alone, because he has so much baggage over Uncle Ben that he won't take a sidekick because he doesn't want to get anybody killed. He has to take the world on his shoulders. That's part of Peter Parker's character, is that he oppresses himself intentionally. So I don't think Spider-Man should ever be part of a team or have a sidekick.
Dion says, what are the best supporting characters, and what can aspiring writers learn from veterans who develop these supporting characters for heroes? My favorite supporting characters are rogues and like the Paragon. I love a character like Splinter or something like Gandalf. When they finally take them away, like, what if they've imparted the knowledge, they've given some support and confidence, but how much did the main character not learn? Oh my goodness, they're just on their own now. What are all the things they missed out on? And maybe they can support them from beyond the grave. But I love a good mentor character like that.
Yeah, I mean, I like mentor characters too, but that is a tricky character to write, because then they become a deus ex machina. And as much as I like Gandalf, there's a lot of times when he just comes in and solves the problem for the cast, and it makes your cast look bad when you have this all-powerful character who just comes in and snaps his fingers and fixes everything that the main characters couldn't solve. It makes the main characters kind of look like kind of crappy. Also, like if your character knows too much, your supporting character, your wise old man character, your mentor character knows a lot, it makes your main cast look stupid. When this character's coming in and divulging all the information the main character needs and then leaving, it's like, well, maybe I should be watching the Gandalf show and not the Frodo show, because Gandalf seems to know what's going on. There's a part in The Hobbit where, so it's after Gandalf saves the company, that Bilbo and the dwarves, from the trolls, right? And it makes the dwarves and Bilbo kind of look like really crappy.
Yeah, because they're about to die, and he just shows up.
And he comes in and he turns the trolls to stone. But they get to the part where they're right outside Mirkwood Forest, and Gandalf's like, "All right, guys, I'm going to bounce." I'm like, "But Gandalf, we need you." And like, "I've wasted enough of my time with you people. I got stuff to do with some guy named the Necromancer. I'm out of here. You're on your own." And that's actually ends up creating a lot of tension in the story, because we just saw that Gandalf keeps bailing them out of all these problems, and that these characters are unsuited to the adventure they're going on. But now they're not going to have Gandalf to bail them out, and that actually puts the characters in a really scary position. It was done, deliberately by Tolkien in the story, is that Gandalf is more powerful and he is better than Thorin. He's
got too much
Bilbo,
to do.
But he's got too much to do, and he's got to bounce. Now these characters are on their own. Let's see how they handle it. And Ninja Turtles, there's a lot of great stories where Splinter's gone. Maybe the Turtles are off on an adventure, in Northampton, and Splinter's back in New York City. They don't have Splinter to rely on. They've got to do this by themselves. Or maybe Splinter is dead. He's died in a few continuities. And the Turtles have to learn to find their way in life without their father, without their mentor and their sensei. And that creates a really interesting dynamic. So you can have the stronger character who's the supporting character that comes in and out of the story. Just don't overuse it, because that can make your characters look bad.
What's your favorite kind of supporting character?
My favorite kind?
He asked, who are the best supporting characters? Who's the best?
Well, I mean, we gave some examples of, like Gandalf and Splinter, etc. My favorite kind of supporting character, I can tell you my least favorite kind is I'm less interested in the character who exists just as a love interest, who's just... I don't really like Liz Allen and Betty Brant as characters when I'm reading these old Spider-Man comics. Is that they literally just exist there for Spider-Man's harem. Spider-Man should never be Tenchi Muyo. It shouldn't be a harem anime. So I don't like characters who exist just as love interests. But if you give them an extra facet, so like in Common America we have Siggy. Who's potentially a love interest for Carly, but he does other things. He runs the gun shop. He provides some an avenue to deliver backstory because he grew up with Carly, but he's also someone who can provide some wisdom and provide some information. So he serves several purposes. I don't think there's a one size fits all for your supporting character. Your supporting character should be as fleshed out as your main character, and there should be lots of different aspects about them. Like we talked about, J. Jonah Jameson hits all three boxes on the checklist. He's an antagonistic character, he's a supportive character, and he's an informative character. He's all three of those things at once, and that's why he's the best supporting character.
Like Jim
in Spider-Man
Gordon's
comics.
similar too. He can be a foil for Batman. He can give him information, and he can support him all in the same issue.
Yep. So that's the best kind of character. Is a supporting character who hits all those boxes and isn't just a one-note supporting character.
Very good. Dion wants to know any teases for next week's episode. So next week, I believe we're going to tackle cliffhangers and endings. That should be fun. But the week after that, I'm going to be in the hospital. We're having our third boy. We're very blessed and very happy about that. So next week after that, offline, Aaron and Mark and myself, we're going to record like a viewer Q&A. So I will be soliciting in the community tab for questions just about writing. If you wanted to ask something about a previous a lesson that we've done, but maybe you didn't get to watch that one live, you can answer all those questions. We'll try and do like a 45-minute, 1 hour Q&A just of all the questions. I'll also put it out on Twitter and stuff too. So that should be the next 2 episodes here. Do we have any more questions about this one? I think we might be done. All
right. Well, we kept it at an hour and 8 minutes. Not bad.
Yeah, this is much shorter than most. So if you can think of some questions, I'll be soliciting that probably the next day or two as we get ready for this. We will be back next time. This is the normal time now. It's going to be 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time, just to accommodate some people on the left coast because it was a little bit too early. thank you all so much for joining us. I love doing these. These are a lot of fun, and can't wait to talk about cliffhangers and endings.
And I hope that my audio worked better this week.
It was beautiful. It was perfect.
Oh, thank goodness. So it's just so people who are curious, it's not a tech issue. It's about the service in my area, AT&T's internet service. It's a high use time frame, then it throttles my internet service. So
I'm starting to think something happens with your connection when there's more than just you and I. Every time we've had a third person, your audio is bad. When it's just you and I, it's good.
Well, that's a weird thing though. Is I've never had the problem doing Kinonomicon, the horror stream that I do with Full Custom Hot Dog and Nasser, because we do those on Tuesday nights, which isn't a high service period, and there's 3 of us. And I did not the Bunderdome stream I did yesterday, but I did a Bunderdome stream solo like 2 weeks ago, and it also had problems with my service cutting out. So heck if I know.
Yeah. So all right, we'll be here next week, and thank you to everybody, and thank you for the well wishes for the baby and the family. We're very excited, and we'll see you around.